I dropped Mary Reed at the airport with the gang going to Guatemala, and I haven't wanted to go to Guatemala again since I last went, but I got that feeling back. There was a fun gang going there. I mean, you had Marguerite and Jeff, then you had Martha and Marianne and Carrie, and then Maddie Herbster and Zach, and some fun Monarch people too, and I was thinking, I might want to go on this trip. This looks fun. So pray for them this week. They're not going to change Guatemala, but they might be changed, and that's what you find in those kind of trips, in those adventures with other people. It's the relationships that are deepened, and that's what's fun. As far as the Joseph story, we're in the Joseph story all year, along with the Gospel of Mark, and they match for some reason, because all Scripture matches. But it's been really amazing. But this week I've just kind of been thinking more of the big picture of the Joseph story, and just pondering on that. We're told Joseph was 17 at the beginning of the story. He's 17. And then he's about 30, we're told, when he goes into the service of the Pharaoh. And then there was 7 years of abundance, and now we're into the years of famine. How many years, not quite sure, but probably a year or two into the famine. So that means, if we do the math, Joseph is at least 37 years old now. And he hasn't seen his father in 20 years. And so the question comes up, why hasn't Joseph tried to call his father? Why hasn't he called? What happened? Why hasn't he, now that he's in a position of power, wouldn't he reach out? Wouldn't he use a messenger and maybe slip a note? Why hasn't he tried to contact his father? And what's really interesting also about the Joseph story that I've been noticing is the narrator doesn't tell us what Joseph is thinking or feeling. Sometimes you get that in stories from the narrator. It's very clear. In this one, it's not. And we might find along the way where the narrator does tell us what Joseph's thinking or feeling, but at this point, we don't get that. And it's interesting, and I think it's intentional, because what it does is it forces us as the reader to then put ourselves there, right? And imagine, okay, I'm not told what Joseph's thinking or feeling, so I have to imagine myself, put myself in his shoes, and then think, what would I think? What would I feel? How would I be feeling? And so that's what we do, and that's what we're doing. That's I Am Joseph. And so it's the brilliance of the story that it brings us in, and we have to. If we're going to really pay attention and stay in this story, we're going to have to say, I am Joseph, and think about what he's thinking. And so I've done that, and you've done that too. And so why hasn't he contacted his father? Let's speculate, shall we? He's a bad son. That's one idea. There is the human side of it, and that's just it, that he's still hurt. He's simply still in pain from that experience. Now, I don't think he blamed Jacob for what happened, but Jacob sent him, Joseph, by himself, didn't send Benjamin, didn't send some servants, knew that the brothers hated Joseph, was well aware, and he sends them all the way up to Shechem, a long, long journey away, a good distance away, a week's walk, sends them to check on these guys. And he had already previously brought a bad report to his father about them. These guys are joking around, Dad. They're not doing their job. He had already done that once. And so maybe he's thinking, Jacob, you should have, Dad, you should have protected me more. Maybe he's thinking that. And then also, if we think about it, if he was to connect with his father, he would have to then see his brothers. And he's probably not in the mood to see his brothers. After they threw him in a pit, we're talking of killing him. He's pleading. We get that later on, that he pleaded with them. They were even within earshot of Joseph saying, this is happening because of what we did to Joseph. They don't realize Joseph's in earshot. They don't know it's Joseph. He can understand them. He's using an interpreter to stay hidden from them. And he hears them talking about this and saying, he was pleading with us, and we still threw him in the pit, sold him to slavery to Egypt. So is he... at this, why hasn't he contacted his father? Well, he's still hurt. And it's family dynamics that he doesn't want to enter into. If we're going to do the I am Joseph thing, and this is one of the interesting things about this story, is it addresses so many different parts of life, and family dynamics are a really important thing. If your immediate family, it's like when you go back, no matter how long it's been, no matter how much you've changed, you get back with your immediate family in the same family dynamics, then go into effect, don't they? It's a very powerful thing. And like Joseph, sometimes we feel like, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to return to that. They all just look at me. They've already pigeonholed me, and no matter what I do or how long it's been or how much I've changed, they'll just think of me and treat me the same, and everything will just go back to the way it is. And so he's dealing with stuff that we deal with. It certainly is the case, and that's tough stuff. We need God to help us with that, don't we? So the second reason, and this is important with the Joseph story, is the covenant is really important as we go along and at the end. And the idea is the family going, you got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now his sons, and it's a patriarchal society idea that there's one man in charge. And it doesn't seem fair to us, like the inheritance should be split between all the children. Well, maybe it was in a sense, but there's one ruler, there's one leader, and there's one person who the covenant of God is passed down to be the leader. And it's not just as simple as the eldest son gets it. In fact, it's the eldest son hasn't gotten it yet. You see, because Abraham had Ishmael first, and then it went through his next son, Isaac, Sarah's son. And then you have Esau and Jacob, who are twins. Esau came out first, and Jacob was the one that the covenant went through, thanks to some trickery by him and his mother. But seemingly God's plan, and God confirmed the covenant with Jacob. And so now Jacob has this burden on himself to say, who of these 12, this big mess of kids that I have here, who's going to be the next patriarch? This is the age of the patriarchs for the people of faith. Who's the next ruler? So I have to choose one of these 12. And Joseph looked really good at first. First of all, the first 4 brothers had all messed up. The first oldest had all made grave mistakes. We've talked about that. We don't have to run through those nasty tales. But they had made some serious mistakes, and they were pretty much out of the running. But Joseph, remember, was Jacob loved Rachel the most. That was his true love. And Rachel had 2 sons, Joseph and then Benjamin. And she died giving birth to Benjamin. So that's a bit of a strike against Benjamin. So Joseph is in the good running here. And then he was his father's favorite, remember? His father loved Joseph, gave him the the Dreamcoat, the Technicolor Dreamcoat. You know, this is the guy. He's looking like he's in the running. Then he has the dream that he's in charge of his brothers. So here we go. Joseph looks like the man. But there was a curveball, wasn't there? It's very clear that the promised land is in Canaan. That's been clear from when God said to Abraham, you have to move to the land that I have planned for you, promised for you. And then that was always the place. That was clear. They all knew that. So Joseph's in Egypt. So he's in the wrong territory. So he's probably thinking, you know, I was in the running for that covenant, but I'm probably not anymore. I'm here now. And he's stuck. Despite his position of power, he can't go to the Pharaoh and say, I would like to tender my resignation now. I'm going to retire to the land of Canaan to be with my father. Thank you. Where's my golden parachute? He is in the service of Pharaoh. He's not going anywhere, and he knows it. He's stuck. So how, in his mind, how can the covenant go through him when he's stuck in Egypt? He's in the wrong place. It's clear what the right place is, and he's not in it. So he's thinking maybe that's another reason he hasn't pursued that, because he realizes that he's probably on the out for the covenant there. And Egypt was a mighty empire. Israel was a family. He was a clog in a big machine. There was no going back. And you know, if we look at the big picture objectively, if we look at how this works, it was absolutely necessary for this plan to work that Joseph would be in Egypt. Otherwise, this whole thing probably would not have been able to work, because Egypt was an empire at the time, and it had the infrastructure. 2, it had the agriculture. It could, for the 7 years, to produce the type of grain that was necessary to keep the world alive for 7 years after that, only in Egypt. It had the ability to store the grain, to distribute it. It was necessary. Egypt was a necessary piece when we look at this objectively. There probably wasn't another place. Some of the empire, Egypt was an early developed empire. And the rest, you know, we're going from basically villages and nomads to empires. This is the era in history, and Egypt was an early empire. So it was absolutely necessary. Egypt also had the defenses, the military, because if all this grain was in the wrong hands, all sorts of bad things could happen. And if it was in a smaller nation, then the larger nation would just come around and say, thank you very much, it's a famine, we're taking all the grain and we'll be leaving now. So Egypt had the defenses to keep that grain for themselves. And so, for Joseph to say to his brothers, you're spies, that was a legitimate concern. Anybody who came in there, they were worried, are these spies from some other nation that's going to come in here and try to attack us and take this precious resource that we have, life itself. And then it was also very necessary for Joseph to be the one who was in Egypt, because Joseph was generous. Joseph shared. The fact that Joseph just simply sold the grain to other nations is amazing. Because if it was in the wrong hands, if it was in someone else's hands, essentially what they would have done would have been enslaved all the rest of the nations. Or picked some enemies and said, no, we're not giving you grain. And so effectively committing a genocide, starving out some people, and then maybe attack them when they're weak. I mean, if this power is in the wrong hands, history could have been changed forever. So it was absolutely necessary that it was Egypt, and it was absolutely necessary that it was Joseph in Egypt. And so really, I think my point is, he did even enslave the Egyptians to Pharaoh's service over the years, but every time he did something, their response was, "You have saved our lives." The only people he enslaved was his own people in service to Pharaoh. And so they were so grateful. Everyone was so grateful. So really the point is, in the big picture, is God has a plan, doesn't he? God can use anybody and make his plan come true. I've known plenty of jerks that have done God's will in my life. Monarch wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for a jerk who said, "This is God's will," and you know what? He was exactly right, and we celebrate it. God can use people in our lives. He will do his will. He has a plan. Do you need to hear that this morning? He has a plan. He has a plan to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you hope in a future. He does. It's the year anniversary since Alex. All we can say is God has a plan. Do we know what it is? Why and all this? No. God has a plan. So to this same point is where Jesus encourages us with the mustard seed simile. This is it. Mark 4:30 through 32. What shall we say the kingdom of God is like? Or what parable shall we use to describe it? It is like a mustard seed, which is the smallest seed you plant in the ground. Yet when planted, it grows and becomes the largest of all garden plants, with such big branches that the birds of the air can perch in its shade. Now, just to give you some understanding of, because I didn't have any, I've never gardened mustard, but you can. Do you remember in 2010 we were doing Sustaining Faith? I went to Palmer Feed and bought like a pound of mustard seeds for like $1, and then we couldn't figure out how are we going to get this in people's packets, and the mustard seeds were spilling on the floor and disappearing, these tiny little things. And so we took tape and then put tape on the mustard seeds and then taped it to the letter. Do you remember this, Dawn? Dawn's glad we're not doing big packets anymore. Those were rough days. Those were days in Egypt for Dawn. Dawn, we're going to do this gigantic packet for everybody and put some mustard seeds in there. But what happens with a mustard is it's an annual, just like the rest of the garden stuff. It's not a perennial. It's an annual, and so you put it in your garden and it grows, and there's some nice leaves, and you can use that in your salad or whatever. But then the flavor is in the seed. That's where you get mustard. It's not from the leaves. It's from the seed. And so what you do with your mustard is you let it go to seed. So you let it just grow. And so it becomes this big gnarly bush thing. And then, you're waiting and waiting, and finally the seed pods come out, and then you get the seeds. So in a garden with mustard, you're like, what's that big nasty bush? That huge thing that's just looking like it's overgrown, and there's other little clumps of stuff. And that's the mustard. And so you can get the seeds out of it. So that's the idea, what Jesus is going with. So, and then thinking big picture again, these are just, isn't it amazing that we have things that grow out of the ground that we can eat? I mean, I'm allergic to dairy, but it's pretty amazing that there's this animal that produces milk that we can eat. And I'm not allergic. Guess what? I'm not allergic to raw milk. It's the pasteurized milk. See, I can do raw milk. I can do what God and God's intentions. But we get so wrapped up in, I think, the difficulty of life that we often miss the simple goodness, don't we? That we can put something in the ground and it grows and we can eat it and it sustains us, and then it has seeds so it can be done over and over again, and there's all these varieties and just all this wonder of how God provides for us. Isn't that the simple goodness of life? And he doesn't just give us just food. It's not like this mechanical, we eat so we can survive. He gives us flavor now. Flavor, Look, you can take these seeds, and these are all, God's, in Isaiah, it says, now I'm the one who told you this is what you do with this plant, and this is, at some point, we're not the ones that discovered how we can make out of mustard seed some flavor. God gave that to us. It's a gift. It was given in somebody, and somebody had a dream somewhere and made a mistake and screwed up and came up with mustard. I mean, that's a gift. So, God isn't even, it's wonderful that he sustains us, but he not only does that, he puts flavor in our life. He does that. That's how good he is. That's how good of a planner he is. And so a mustard seed is tiny. They're cheap. There's like 700 in a pound, and a pound is 95 cents at Palmer Feed. I mean, they're not valuable. They're tiny, and we did the tape thing. I still had like half a pound of mustard. I didn't even know what to do with these things. And I didn't want to throw them out in my yard because then, all of a sudden, it's big gnarly bushes. Maybe that's better than the grass. Who knows? But what the idea is of Jesus, to the world we're mustard seeds. Us, our ministry, the church. OCC's a mustard seed. It's always going to be a mustard seed to the world. It's just this little thing. Not valuable, not relevant, not cool, kind of old. This is the church. The church as a whole. One of my buddies, he goes to his family goes to St. Luke's downtown, and so they dress up, and he comes out to his car on Sunday morning, and his family, and they're all dressed up going to church, and the neighbor's like, whoa, old school, look at you going to church on Sunday morning. Wow, like throwback, And he's like, okay, yeah. That's what it's the church and the work of the kingdom of God is a mustard seed. If it's not, it's probably too humanly focused. It's just a mustard seed. It doesn't have any great value to the world. It seems insignificant and small. The world can say to each of us, what's your ministry? What difference have you really made? Come on. Why even have that faith? It doesn't, to the world it's a mustard seed. But in the eternal view, over time, it's the biggest one. It grows beyond. It dwarfs the rest of them. The gardener lets it grow and accepts its awkwardness. And then it produces in time, in eternal time, it produces seed that carries on for generation after generation after generation. I said last week, or I think it was last week, was Pentecost. There's never been a generation where there has not been a church. There will be, because God will assure it. And do we know exactly what that looks like because we blend church and culture so much? No, we don't know what it's going to look like. But there will be. There will always be, because God's doing it. The planter, the gardener, is doing it. He's planting the seeds. So what looks to the world like mustard seeds, in God's view, in eternal time, in eternity, is the greatest. It grows the biggest. And so the real question really is, what's our view of ourselves? I think that's what it brings us to. What's our view of ourselves? Every once in a while, you just got to read some Henry Nouwen, don't you? It's just so simple and wonderful, and just brings you back. So I out of my parents' library that's been passed down to me, there's some old Henry Nouwen books, and just little one, and I took it out, and it's called Solitude. And here was part of it. When we start being too impressed with the results of our work, we slowly come to the erroneous conclusion that life is a scoreboard. And that is how we measure our worth. Before we are fully aware of it, we have sold our souls to the grade givers. We become of the world because we become what the world makes us. You know, our call is not to the worldly scoreboard. It's just to be part of the kingdom, whatever that looks like. Whatever part God has to play. As Ted read a while back, the rabbi in his prayer said, I'm not to be Moses. I'm to be Yosef, or whatever the guy's name was. You know, whatever part we are to play. Connor's to be Connor. Does anyone want Connor to be anyone but Connor? I mean, that's, you know, for all of us. We're just to be who God wants us to be. And our value comes from God. And what Nouwen says in his Solitude is that's where you find your value. Because it is in that solitude with God that the gardener, the planter, he whispers to us and says, I love you. You're valuable to me. And that's where our worth comes from. We all need that. We all need to be reminded of that. Because if we're trying to measure our worth by what the world sees, we're going to come to the conclusion the world's going to break us down and tell us we're nothing but a mustard seed. Cheap, irrelevant. But God says, no, you're part of this bigger thing, and you're special, and you have a special part to play. And the other, and that's exactly what Joseph was doing. The world may see us as little mustard seeds, but the gardener knows us and grows us to great heights. And then the birds, those are other people. The birds are actually other nations. In the Old Testament, there's several analogies, and that's what Jesus is referring to, of a kingdom, and then when the birds come and perch underneath it, it's other nations, it's other people that come into the shade. See, because God grows in us not just something for us, but we create shade for birds, for other people. The mustard seed that seems insignificant has a reach, like OCC, all over the world. There's people that have been affected all over the world. And then we become shade for those people who need it, who need healing. That's what we want to be. That's exactly what Joseph was doing in Egypt. God had planted a mustard seed in Egypt. It had grown up, and it was now giving shade to all the rest of the nations. The other birds were all coming underneath its shade, and he was providing for them. I'll end with this analogy. The Hobbit, of course, Tolkien, one of my favorites, and the latest movies, they had way too many action scenes. If you took out the action scenes, you had 30 minutes of each of the three movies, which you could have made into one movie, and it would have been total gold, because there was still some really good stuff in there that they really did try to take from Tolkien, not just from The Hobbit, but from his other books, and kind of bring that story together. But the scene that jumped out at me was when Bilbo goes with the dwarfs and they go to the Lonely Mountain, and there was the dragon in there. The dragon is now slain by a man from Lake Town. But the dwarfs then go into the halls and see all the gold. And so the king, the leader, Thorin Oakenshield, now has dragon fever, where he has promised to humans and elves along the way that I will, if you help me along this adventure to get the dragon out of there and to take over this hall of the dwarves again, I will help you. I will pay you part of the treasure. There's a huge hoard of treasure there. There's plenty to share. But now he's seen it all. He's got dragon fever, and he won't give away a single coin. And so he starts walling it up, because he knows people are going to come ask for it, and he knows other nations are going to come try to get it. And so he has gone crazy. And they all see it. But he's their leader, and Bilbo's a little tiny hobbit. So, and Bilbo has taken the most valuable stone, the Arkenstone. He found it, and he tucked it away, and he's realized, I can't, if I give this to Thorin now, he'll just go over the top. But Thorin keeps looking for it, because it's the most valuable one. It's his family heirloom, and he can't find it. So now he's starting to doubt everyone, including his brothers, these dwarves, other dwarves, and Bilbo as well. And so Bilbo's in a quiet moment, and he's looking hopefully at something that he's pulled out of his pocket. And Thorin sees him, and then comes and demands, what is in your pocket? What are you looking at? Show me. He's paranoid, of everybody. And what was it that was in his pocket that was giving him hope in that moment? He had the Ring of Power. He had the Arkenstone. What was Bilbo looking at that gave him hope? He opens his palm, and in his palm is an acorn that he had picked up along the way. And he said, what I'm going to do is when I go back to the Shire, I'm going to plant this above my home in Bag End, and it will grow. And that was the hope that he had. And that was the hope that was keeping him through these dark times and giving him hope. So, that's the idea. God has a plan. He's the master gardener. What looks tiny and insignificant in the world's eyes, he can plant and grow. And the birds can come underneath it for shade. So let's take just a minute and spend that solitude with God. Let him whisper to us. And Phyllis is going to come up after a couple minutes and remind us of the altar piece that we're working on.